Gentlemen, good afternoon. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this celebration of the 10th anniversary of the founding of the Graduate Entry Medical School. I'm Des Ledden, the interim head of the school, and I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you, to senators and elected officials, to clergy, to vice-chancellor, the president, members of the governing authority, deans and distinguished guests. You're all heartily welcome. I'd like to also extend a special welcome to those of you who have travelled from abroad, and I'm thinking particularly of Mike Larvin and Paul Finucane, Leilil, who travelled from the other side of the earth. I'm not sure what it is about former heads of the medical school that they feel a need to move as far away as possible, but perhaps in time I'll find out. For all of you who've travelled to Limerick from around the country, we're very grateful. And we're also connected on webcast to those of you who were not able to travel. So to our friends in New Zealand, thinking of Mary, and our Canadian graduates across the country, we're delighted that you're able to join us. A number of thanks to all of you for coming, of course, and to the alumni and to the Bank of Ireland for its support. But as you all know, absolutely nothing happens without organization. And sometimes even with organization, nothing happens. But I'd like to extend a special thanks to the two people who made this happen. And I'm talking, of course, about Anne Murphy and Sharon Nolan. If you'd join me here now. So without this, it would not have happened. I'm not a hugger, but Paul Finucane is the hugger-in-chief, so perhaps you would do the honors, Paul. Okay, once for you. I'm sure there'll be... The rationale for today is fairly simple. The 10th birthday is a milestone, and I'm going to milk the next metaphor for all I can. So the school is emerging from infancy and heading into its teens and new challenges. But in truth, everyone who's in the auditorium today has contributed to the success of the school in greater or lesser ways. And without you, it simply would not have happened. Sometimes, when we're up to our ears in problems, it's easy to go past these events, but you know, it's really better to pause and reflect and give thanks for what has been achieved, because the achievement has been truly remarkable. And we'll explore some of those themes this afternoon. The format is very PBL-ish. There's an interview with Paul Finucane, who arguably is the one who's most responsible for it all. Paul wouldn't admit that, but we'll see. There is then a change in the program, of course. The dancers have to go somewhere. And so after I speak to Paul, we're going to push the chairs back. Some musicians will magically appear and people will dance across the stage. I have no idea what's going to happen, and I have a slight anxiety about it, but we shall see. There will then be a panel discussion, and after that you can have a bio break for 10 minutes or so. When we resume, there's another panel discussion, and it's very PBL-ish, and I'm hoping to be able to stir it just enough that they start arguing with each other or disagreeing. It might happen, we'll see. Then Dr. Fitzgerald has kindly agreed to give us his thoughts and some near concluding remarks. And after that, well, there's no birthday without a present, so Pierce Grace is going to present a present to the university and the school of a piece of work which he has done. And the incoming Dean of EHS, Rachel Setfi, is going to present some small but special tokens to the founding members. After that, well, there's no birthday without a cake either. You will have the unforgettable sight of Paul Finucane cutting the 10th birthday cake up in the lobby. So don't rush home. Just before we begin the interview, a couple of observations, if I might, about relationships and supports of this school. None of this could have happened without the support of the national and regional governments, and in fact that means the taxpayers of Ireland. It wouldn't have happened without the support of the other Irish medical schools either, and it's worth remembering that we have very close linkages. We work with our friends in Galway, in an academy in Ballinasloe. We share excellent facilities with the College of Surgeons in Kilkenny, with UCC in Clonmel, and with UCD in Tullamore. So we're greatly enriched by our ability to work with the other universities, and they have been very supportive as we've gone through this. The Irish Medical Council, who've travelled down, Una O'Rourke and her team, have travelled down from Dublin today, keep a grandparently eye on the entire process and make sure that we're proceeding in the right direction. Our HSE friends are outstanding, and you can see, if you get a chance, the result of that work if you visit the CERC, the Clinical Education Research Centre at UHL, which is a state-of-the-art facility. And we're very grateful for that, and I think it's a synergistic relationship where we work with the HSE works with us, and together we're stronger for it. We have the support of a large number of faculty, full-time and adjunct, over a network of over 150 family doctors throughout the region, from Kilkenny to Kerry to Ballinasloe, which is really quite unprecedented. We have the support of the city and regional government, and we're very proud to contribute to that. Without our colleagues in nursing and clinical therapies and education and the other disciplines across the university, we'd be much less than we are. With regard to education, students are at the center of this, and producing excellent doctors is the mission. We use a non-traditional education method, which was ahead of its time, really, and GEMS researchers are outstanding and are involved in work throughout the region, from exclusion, social exclusion, migrant health, to molecular genetics of cancer. And it's an extraordinary portfolio of talent. In terms of how we're doing, I'd say we're doing very well. Our graduates are highly respected for their excellence. Our researchers are continuing to prosper, publish, and have an impact. And if those figures are maybe a little too vague, let me leave you with one. This year, the number of interns at University Hospital Limerick is the highest in its history, and 80% of those are GEMS graduates. And that, I think, is a true testimonial to the success to date of the school. So, let me invite, on your behalf, the horse himself, the man who can tell us how it all happened, and we'll interview him. He thinks he knows what the questions all are, but some of them may change a bit. And so, please join me in welcoming Professor Paul Finucane.
Thanks very much. Great to be here. Great to see the supper ranges.
Welcome home.
Thank you, sir.
Will we pretend they're not there?
We'll pretend they're not there, yeah.
We'll just have we'll have a chat. Do you want me to sit here or you're good?
No, good.
Okay,
good.
fine.
Yeah.
Paul, seriously, perspective of 2017, I mean, you would not think that Ireland needed another medical school when you kicked this off. How did this happen? What were you thinking?
Did we need another medical school? You know, the Irish answer is we did and we didn't. Let's start off with we didn't. And certainly at the time, just looking at the numbers of medical schools that are in other countries, and the figures I have here is that the UK has 32 medical schools for a population of 66 million. Your adoptive country, Canada, 17 medical schools for 37 million. So roughly, a medical school for 2 million is the international currency. My adoptive country, Australia, does a bit better or worse depending on your perspective. 20 medical schools for 25 million, but still something in excess of $1 million. In Ireland at the time, 2007, there were 5 medical schools, and of course, if you include Queen's, that was 6, for a population of 4.5 million, so it seemed as if we were well served. A good friend of mine, respected colleague, Mirish Fitzgerald, who was the Dean of the Medical School in UCD, he had a catchphrase at the time because all of the 5 Irish medical schools were under financial pressure. And he said, if you've got 5 starving children, it's generally not a good idea to think about having a 6th child. So there was that persuasive argument. But as against that, there's no question that at the time, Irish medical schools were struggling not just in terms of their financial basis, but in terms of their processes and the quality of their graduates. And certainly bodies like the Medical Council were becoming concerned about the quality of Irish graduates and believing that they were no longer fit for purpose. Medical education at the turn of the century hadn't changed since we were in medical school in the 70s, so in that 40 years, zip had happened, and there was need for a fresh approach. And international experience told us that in places like Canada with McMaster, in Australia with Newcastle, in Israel with Beersheba, in Holland with Maastricht, that really what you needed was a new school that wasn't constrained by processes to take a fresh approach to medical education. And ultimately, I think that's what we need a new medical school. That's what swung the debate in its favour.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of what was meant to be different about this school, I mean, we had schools already.
Yeah.
What were the key things that were supposed to be?
Essentially, everything was different, Des. I mean, it said there are 3 elements to any educational event. There's the students, there's the teachers, there's the curriculum. And certainly at UL, all 3 elements were designed to be different. We could spend an hour talking about this, but I mean, if you want to come out with a soundbite, it was essentially that we were bringing principles of adult education into medical education in Ireland for the first time. We were treating students as adults, telling them that they could be trusted to identify their own learning needs, and while the medical school would help them, it wouldn't spoon feed them. So a move away from the didactic teaching that you and I were exposed to, where you essentially swallow the manual and then you spit it out at the exam, and you don't really know how much of the information you're assimilating is going to be useful to you in your subsequent career, and hey-ho, quite a bit of it wasn't, to a situation where students are learning in a clinical context, much more relevant information, a broader education, and much more geared to producing the doctors that are needed now and in the future.
And when did you come across that type of learning first?
I suppose I'd been exposed to it for quite a number of years, Des. I mean, I had worked in Cardiff at a time when they were trying very hard to change their fossilised curriculum into something innovative and set up a medical education master's programme that I got involved with. And then that paved my way to going to Australia, where I was in Newcastle, which was one of the very pioneering medical schools, followed hot on the heels of McMaster in Canada. And then after that went to Flinders in South Australia, where I was involved in establishing a graduate entry medical school, the first in Australia, with a PBL-based curriculum. So I had, I suppose, spent 10 or 15 years in the medical education environment before coming to UL.
Still, it seems like a radical change. You must have had some anxieties about introducing it, did you?
Not a bit, no. And that's blunt and honest. I mean, I think, it was as if all my birthdays had come together and somebody said, look, here's an opportunity. At the blink of an eye is what it took me to want to join in the fun, and fun it was.
Professional competencies, can you speak to that? Why did you make it such a core part of the curriculum?
Yeah, again,
and can you just tell us what they are?
Novel in an Irish context, not novel in an international context, and the idea is, that within a medical education curriculum, knowledge is important and always will be. Skills acquisition, including the acquisition of communication skills, is important, but also the attitudinal learning that are encompassed in the professional competencies, that's also important. And what we did in Limerick is what many other medical schools had done, is to weight those so that the knowledge domain took up 50% of curricular time and 50% of assessment. Skills, including communication skills, procedural skills, took up 25%, and the professional competencies, the attitudinal learning, took up 25%. And I think, or at least as I understand it, UL has fought very hard to maintain the focus on the professional competencies. It's always a challenge. People absolutely understand the relevance of more knowledge about anatomy and biochemistry and immunology, so there's always competition for the knowledge domain to swamp everything else, and I think you need to be very vigorous in saying the attitudinal learning is very, very important and is going to be maintained, and I think UL, to its great credit, has managed to do that. And of course, the reason why doctors get into trouble later in their career, as Una and others in the Medical Council will testify, it's almost never because of a lack of knowledge. It's because of the communication skills or indeed the attitudinal things that are missing.
Paul, one of the other things which strikes me as very different about the curriculum here is the emphasis on primary care. Yeah. What drove that?
Billy O'Connell. we had a walk on the beach in Milltown Malbay in Spanish Point. No, that's true, but I mean, just to embellish on that, I mean, 50% of the graduates of all medical schools, give or take, end up in general practice. And for historical reasons that go back over many hundreds of years, there has been a disregard for primary care in traditional medical curricula. When I went to medical school in UCC, very fine medical school for its time, there was an optional 1-week exposure to general practice in a 6-year program. We turned that around and gave a full 6 months, 25% of clinical training. And it was targeted actually not at people who ended up going into general practice, but at people who might end up spending the rest of their careers in hospital medicine. So the psychiatrists, the obstetricians, the orthopedic surgeons, that they would have some understanding of what happens before and what happens after a hospital experience, which of course is a tiny, 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 tiny amount of anybody's health and illness experience. But it was actually Billy O'Connell and myself on the beach in Milltown Malbay where we chewed the fat and said, look, will this work and how can it be made to happen? And not just Billy, but then he brought in all his friends in the GP networks and it was just fantastic, the support we got from general practice.
And we'll explore that a little bit more with Bill Shannon and yourself in one of the panel discussions. Paul, it's always dangerous maybe to point to individuals who've contributed more than others because many, many people contribute.
Yeah.
But are there any people in particular you would like to put on record as being fundamental to this?
Yeah. Would you mind if I spent a little bit of time on this, Des, because I think it is really important. I've given, you did signal that this question was coming and I did want to give a bit of time. And again, I suppose that the stock answer is no, it was a team approach and everybody, we all kind of blah-de-blah-de-blah. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth.
You could stick with that one.
Yeah, you could, but it would be a lie. And the UL Medical School was the product of one person and one person alone who took the vision and made it happen, and that's John O'Connor, and it's just fantastic to see John in the audience here today. The story behind that is that apparently, and again this was before my time, but apparently in 2003 there was a celebration, as I understand it, not unlike what's happening here today, to celebrate the gains that had been made in the health sciences with the School of Nursing and then the physio and the speech and language in the OT schools. And at that function, John apparently was buttonholed by Declan Lyons and Pierce Grace, both in the audience as well. And they said, John, what about a medical school? And John, by his own admission, because his memoir is here with me, said he initially kind of thought this was a step too far for UL, but when he thought about it, he said, yes, this is the way to go. And of course, anybody who has worked in UL with John O'Connor knows that once John takes the bit between the teeth, the outcome is inevitable. So John is the one who drove it. He did bring a pool of people together, 5 people, the gang of 5. That's Mairead Waters, who subsequently became the school manager, John Maroney, Don Barry and myself, and we'd go along and watch John as he plotted a strategy and pursued a strategy. And it was extraordinary to behold. In my career, I have come across a handful of people that were beyond outstanding. When I was a medical student, Michael Hyland in Cork, a geriatrician who first awoke my interest in it as a specialty. Wonderful, 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 saintly man. Later in Dublin, Jacques Noel, wonderful, wonderful geriatrician, a man I would have gone to war for. Then I went to Wales and worked with John Pathy, who was just this extraordinary bundle of energy, dynamism. in Australia, came across Nick Saunders, who was initially the Dean of Medicine in Flinders and then Vice-Chancellor of Newcastle University, John Chalmers, another these people you come across and you think, gosh, how can people like this kind of walk in the same planet that I walk in? And then you come across John O'Connor. He would have blown all of them away. Simply extraordinary man. And can I say that with all extraordinary men, exasperating and almost impossible to work with.
You don't need to go there.
I do need to say this.
Just leave it.
No, absolutely not. And I often remember after a meeting coming back to Mairead's office and saying to Mairead, that if John was ever found in his office with a penknife in his back, all the people had to do was come to me, and my only concern was that Mairead would beat me to it. These extraordinary abilities to kind of move 90 degrees or even 180 degrees and totally unreasonable with a lot of what he was expecting. I remember one meeting, and Mairead will attest to this, where John, a very, very quiet spoken, humble, unassuming man who almost never lost the plot. But, when he did lose the plot, you then remembered it. And I remember one day at a meeting, somebody, and it wasn't me, so it was one of the other three, had the temerity to say to John, no, John, when he was, we must be realistic here. We must be realistic. And there was an intake of breath from John, and his voice went up about 8 octaves. And he said, realistic. He said, realistic. He said, if we are realistic, we'd never achieve anything, he said. And a final thing that I just want to say before wrapping up on this, and this needs to be said as well, that again, as a mark of John's greatness, always there at the front if there was ever direction to be given and a shoulder put to the wheel. But whenever the accolades were to be given out, John always wasn't to be found. He'd melted into the background. And I once had the extraordinary role of actually accepting the Limerick Person of the Year for the work that John had done. I think, you and I have been in situations where we've had to take the rap for things that other people have done.
You don't feel a little shame about that or anything?
Yeah, absolutely. But what's almost as bad is actually having to front up and take the credit for the work of other people. An extraordinary man. And the simple answer to your question is there would be no medical school in Limerick and no medical school in UL were it not for John O'Connor, and he's the person who needs to take the credit for this.
Thank you, Paul. Well, if we put up a statue to John in the future, I'll make sure there's a penknife in the back.
Well, but you better fingerprint it to see whether it's mine or Mairead's.
Overall, UL has about 18-20% international students, I think. Dr. Fitzgerald might correct me. GEMS has about 33%.
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
I think by accident, at least that's my take on it. The initial vision for the medical school is that there'd be 120 students taken in annually, and of those 10% would be international, and the other 90% would be Irish EU. And of course, what happens is that as the school was building up, the government started to put a cap on the intake of Indigenous Irish EU students, and we had prepared for greater numbers. So essentially we just said, well, why not take in additional international students?
Yeah.
And of course it was the most fantastic experience. The vast majority of the medical students are Canadian. They've just been fantastic days. I know you have a vested interest in all things Canadian, but they have. Certainly they were the ones who set the academic standards. I was a PBL tutor for a lot of the time. When you go to a tutorial, the Canadian students will be there first, putting the things up on the board, with the Irish students kind of slouching in 5 minutes late. And just a very, very, to a man and a woman, individually and collectively, fantastic group to deal with. And I think we've been very fortunate in UL. For our students across the board, but I think the international students have really been an extraordinary addition to the development of the school.
Thanks, Paul. Paul, we have about 8 or 9 minutes left, so I just want to turn to the audience and tell you that if you have a question, we have a couple of roving microphones, and you'd be very welcome to chip in towards the end. I'm going to leave a few minutes to see if you have any questions. Paul, we're in a beautiful state-of-the-art, purpose-built building now. You began in similarly exalted circumstances?
Well, I mean, arguably, the building that we started out in was every bit as nice, but because we had 2 PBL tutorial rooms in Plassey House in the basement. Yeah, in the Shannon room and in the Helena was telling me earlier that the Russell room, yeah, freezing cold, but just fantastic
don't
to be going to
layer it
work
up,
in the but the short answer to the question is yes. For the first few years, it was a bit like Duffy Circus days. At the end of each academic year, we'd kind of decamp and say where are we off to now, and then and move from C block to D block to A block. I don't remember there being a problem with that. I mean, maybe there was a problem in Moray as the Sorbonne filtered out all the kind of, and I didn't hear any of this. But I think there was, in the medical school in those early years, a feeling that we were pioneers. And, that in getting the school off the ground, we'd have to put up with a bit. Mind you, Buildings and Estates are fantastic. Brian Hand, Robert Reedy, Brian Considine really couldn't have done more to facilitate us. And, of course, we could see the new building coming on stream. So I think we just absorbed it, and there was no big deal. And the students in particular absorbed it. And as I said in the forward to that, very forgiving of whatever failings we had starting off.
Listen, you might agree with me that sometimes if you stay in a medical system, it's hard to see the changes occurring around you. You and I step out occasionally. What do you think the impact of GEMS has been on regional healthcare?
Yeah. I think there are probably people in the audience who would be better able than I to answer that. I mean, I have a view. I think it has had a fairly significant effect. I think there are clearly things that wouldn't have happened. You talked about the CERT building, and we toured that earlier today. That wouldn't have happened clearly without the medical school. I think there's lots of other things that might have happened, but certainly the medical school catalysed the process, so what might have taken decades has happened over a few years. I think of the people we've attracted to the region, people like Calvin Coffey, Amanda Cotter, Anne McFarlane, Liam Glynn. I mean, they wouldn't be here if it weren't for the medical school. And so I see it as a rising tide that's floating a lot of ships, and one of the ships that it's been floating is the health service in the region, because it's not just Limerick, but it's the UL Hospitals Group, and indeed the other affiliated hospitals that you mentioned earlier, Tullamore, Mullingar, Clonmel, so on. So I think that, but that's a personal view, that it has been a tide that has floated a lot of ships.
I understand. Paul, GEMS 20.
Yeah.
Kurt Vonnegut, I think, is the one who said, never make predictions, especially about the future. Where do you think it should go, even if you're not going to predict where it will go?
Yeah, well, I think it's important. Well, a couple of complementary thoughts. I mean, the first thing I think is that there is always a tendency and always a great risk that a new initiative will gradually gravitate to the mean, and that over time that the UL Medical School becomes just another medical school. I think we need to constantly remind ourselves of the reason why we're in existence, and that is because we promised government 10 years ago that we would bring a fresh approach to medical education and would produce doctors that were fit for purpose, both for now and in the future. And I think we need to continue to do that. And I think we are uniquely placed because we are free from the processes and the facilities that stop other medical schools, well-intentioned as they might be, from moving at the same pace. So we need to be light on our feet. I'm reminded, Des, of a friend of mine, a local artist, Vivian Bogan, and Vivian hails from Fecal, and she talks about her art, and she said that she aspires to make her art irritating. And it's not irritating for the sense of irritating or causing offence, but she would say that it's like the grain of sand that causes the oyster to produce a pearl. And I think that that's what the medical school, and indeed the university, needs to continue to be, that it's just kind of a little bit of a naughty child, that it's kind of doing things that are a bit unorthodox, that it is prepared to take risks, that it's prepared to fail. I think that has been the great strength of UL as an institution over many decades, and I would like to think that the GEMS is an expression of that, and that we continue to be the medical school that's fresh, that's innovative, that's, as I say, prepared to do new things, maybe fall on its face, but will be the irritant that will oblige the oyster to produce a pearl.
Thank you, Paul. So on that note, I'm happy to take any questions from the audience, if you have any for Paul Finucane. If not, I think our dancers are probably waiting and musicians may be waiting in the wings. So you and I will exit stage right, I think, Paul.
We have to move the furniture, Des.
Please join me in giving Paul Finucane a warm round of applause. That's for you.
Okay?
Yep, we're good. Are we good, Jasmine? I'd like to introduce you to Jasmine. I'm afraid, Jasmine, I don't have your second name. Jasmine is a faculty member in the Irish World Academy of Music and Dance. Jasmine?
Hi.
Hi. And you're going to introduce this piece to us while the musicians and the dancers get set up. Is that right?
Yes.
Great. Welcome.
Hello. So we are delighted to be here. We are going to present a 15 minutes piece that the dancers from the Irish World Academy, that their present students and past students will perform for you, as well as musicians that they are present students and past students from the Irish World Academy. This piece is being created by myself. My name is Jasmine Chiodi. I work as a tutor in the university, and I'm a choreographer. And the music has been composed by Matthew Noon. He's present here. And we have been working for the last 3 weeks, having in mind this event and having in mind the artistic works that the students of GEMS have been also doing. And mainly, probably topics that they are around humanity and soul and the human body. So we hope that you enjoy, and we can talk later. Thank you.
Well, what an extraordinary performance. I can't say that I understand it, but I certainly, I hope, appreciate it. I'm not sure. Jasmine, are you in the back? Jasmine, would it be inappropriate to ask you what that was, how you interpret it? Could you do that for me?
I started with an idea 3 weeks ago when Sandra offered me this possibility to create a dance piece of a piece that I created in 2014, where we were questioning a little bit the questions around flesh and soul and the impact of both of those aspects. And when she asked me about this commission, I immediately thought about that piece in connection with the ethos of certain things that you are working with. So the idea of the weight of the body, which is inert, and how that becomes alive, the idea of caring, the idea of flesh, the idea of what is it that we consider soul. Are we fixing bodies or are we fixing souls? So there was a couple of those aspects that they were around this piece, and I reworked them for this performance tonight. Well, this afternoon. I don't know what time is it anymore. And then with Michael as well, we have been in dialogue, and the idea was that he was going to respond to the piece of dance together with his musicians, with some of the creations that he already had and new. So he composed as well new for us. And I did want to thank Sandra and the people from the Irish World Academy, the dancers, that they give me a lot of time after school hours to do this, the musicians, and you for having us.
We got it. Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you very much. And I must say, one of the real pleasures about being at UL is that sometimes when you're coming across that extremely beautiful bridge, music wafts out of the World Academy of Music, and you can never be sure what it is, but it's always delightful. So with that, I should mention that we do have a very strong humanities program, and Professor James O'Hare has curated an exhibition of some of the medical students' best works, which are on display in the lobby of the medical school at the moment. And they'll be there for about a week. Some of the catalogues, I believe, are up in the lobby. You're more than welcome to come over and see them, and some of them really, really are, well, actually all of them are really very worthwhile, but some of them are truly outstanding. What we're going to do now is we're going to move to our first panel discussion, which will be about 20 minutes or so. And then we will have a break, and then we will resume with the second panel discussion, the remarks from Professor Fitzgerald, and then the presentation of the birthday presents, and then you will be, I am sure, on your way home this side of 5:30, which is what the plan was. I hope you're enjoying the afternoon so far. I know I am. So I would like to invite our first panelists to come up. It's Deirdre McGrath, who's the Director of Education. Deirdre? Yes? Colm Dunn, the Director of Research for GEMS. Mike Larvin, who's travelled all the way from Malaysia, the previous head of the school. And by no means least, our student representative, Fionn, who was the winner of the Humanities Award this afternoon for his outstanding work in humanities. Now, the way that this is going to work is I'm going to pitch some questions to them just to get the ball rolling. But I hope that it'll break out into a PBL-type discussion. Actually, as you're seated there, it might be even friendlier if I came over and sat beside you. I will. Why don't we run around first, and you can tell people who you are, what you do, just in case everyone doesn't know. Yeah.
So, my name is Phil.
You may want to pull a mic in.
My name is Phil. I'm one of the fourth year medical students at GEMS. I started the program 3 years ago. And I came in with a background from medical science and a few years of teaching human anatomy in the various medical schools around Ireland. So up in Galway, down in Cork and in Dublin as well.
Very good. Deirdre?
Deirdre McGrath, Director of Education with the Medical School. I suppose I'm a graduate originally of UCC, the old traditional model. Worked in Cork for a number of years in my early postgraduate training, and then obviously moved to the UK and worked in London at St George's Healthcare NHS Trust and University Hospital Medical School, where I had my first kind of introduction to the type of model that we have introduced here in UL. So I oversee the education programs in the school, and I also work locally as a clinician in the area of respiratory medicine.
Great, thanks, Deirdre. Colin?
Colin Dunn, I'm the Director of Research for the medical school. I think aside from Paul, I probably had the best job in the school, in the sense that I was starting with a blank slate, a blank page if you like, and I've had the opportunity to work with some fantastic people who have come in. They say you should always surround yourself with brilliant people. I think we've had the opportunity to build a brilliant team, and I've had the pleasure of seeing our research grow, and hopefully we get to talk about that in a few minutes.
We will. Michael?
Mike Larvin. I came here from the University of Nottingham Medical School, where I first met Paul, who came to snoop around the graduate entry school we built in the city of Derby, and stole all our best plans and made them better, including the buildings. And I remember the day he left after his first visit, and we all thought, well, if anyone was ever going to get something done, it would be that chap, Paul Finucane. So that's 12 years ago, long time. I came to look at this job, impressed by the campus, impressed by the people, students, of course. I went back, and Ireland being Ireland, one of our Irish members of staff said, "You and your wife went to snoop around Paul Finucane's job at UL yesterday, over the weekend." She was a Limerick girl with family here. And she said, "You cannot possibly come to Limerick. You cannot possibly move to Limerick." And we said, "Why? It looks grand to us." And she said, "But have you not seen the film Angela's Ashes?" And I said, "Yeah. You could have made that movie about many cities in England at that time, including the one I was raised in." So that didn't work. She said, but Michael, they call it Stab City." And I said, "Anne-Marie, I'm a trauma surgeon. You're only encouraging me." So I have to say it's been a really good 5 years for me. The good people continued. That spirit that you only seem to find in a new medical school, I think Paul is right, it can evaporate. It's still going. I can feel it today. It's great to be back today. I think the trick is just to keep that special spirit going. People want to do something differently in a new medical school. We want to make things better. That's why we come here. And I think the students benefit from that. I think the quality of the graduates is partly because of the quality of the staff I've worked with for the last 5 years. And there's something that's got from these great innovators into our students. And I think they're going to be better than we were. And that's a great thing.
Thank you, Michael. Deirdre, do you feel like this is a viva back in medical school? Not quite. PBL, can you tell people who don't know, not everyone does in the audience, what that's all about, what the advantage of it is, how it translates, if it does, into better doctors? Could you speak to that?
Okay, so I suppose similar to what Paul was talking about earlier, we've introduced a program that is very much founded on problem-based learning, which is an adult learning model. It promotes what we call active, interactive learning. So essentially what happens with PBL is that people come together in small groups, generally under the guidance of a tutor, and they work through a real-world problem. In the case of medicine, that translates into working through a particular patient problem. But the model itself has been translated to other disciplines. So in our School of Architecture here in the University of Limerick is now using PBL, where their students are actually working through design problems. So if we take medicine as the example today, so what literally happens is our students on a weekly basis come together in those small groups and they are presented with a particular patient problem. Patient comes into hospital or into the general practice with, say, for example, in my discipline, breathlessness. So they're given some information about the patient, and the students then activate any prior learning that they may have in relation to breathlessness. Now, some people may come to the table with a science background, some people may have no science background, but they may have had a relative who had asthma or a similar condition. So they activate any existing learning that they have in that space, but they also then try and identify any gaps in their learning. And then they go away over the course of the next few days and they try and fill those gaps. And they do that through kind of a self-directed learning process. So some will go to the library and they will read the textbooks, they'll go through the journals. Other students tend to work in small groups. They do a little bit of that isolated individual or sole learning first of all, but then they bring their knowledge to the smaller group and they try and test each other's knowledge. They try and understand the depth of the learning that's needed or the breadth of the learning before they come back later on in the week to their second problem-based learning tutorial. And it's at that tutorial then that they actually stand and deliver. They present the knowledge that they've acquired and they learn from others in the group who might have acquired knowledge in a different area. And with the guidance of the tutor then we make sure that they basically address that depth and breadth of learning and that they stay on track and that they achieve the learning that's required. I suppose the process itself it's kind of an active learning process, and what we do know is that it allows individuals, I suppose it promotes improved understanding. It also promotes the retention of knowledge, because by revisiting the knowledge later on in the week and at a later time as they come back to the various tutorials, it does promote that kind of knowledge retrieval and the retention of knowledge. But in addition to that, I suppose there's kind of two other aspects of it that are particularly relevant. One is the fact that it allows an integrative approach to looking at the patient in the case of this particular, the medical problem, but an integrative approach to the actual problem at hand. So not only are students learning about, we'll say, the basic sciences, the anatomy, the physiology, the immunology, but they're learning that in the context of a real-life clinical case. And at the same time, they're learning about the attitudinal side that's relevant to that patient's care, whether it's that the patient has a psychological problem or that there may be social circumstances that are preventing them from accessing the healthcare system in their area, or alternatively whether it's a confidentiality issue that may arise in their particular condition, the health law side of the patient's problem. So it has that integrative aspect to it as well. And I suppose the final thing is that the process of PBL allows that collaborative learning approach that fosters higher order skills like team skills, which are essential to working in a multidisciplinary team, which is really what you're going to be doing when you're working in clinical practice down the road. No longer are we working as isolated consultants. We do have to have a team around us in order to ensure best care for our patients. So it promotes those type of skills and also other skills such as communication, interpersonal skills, management, including self-management skills.
I understand. Thank you, Deirdre. Fionn, maybe I could use that as a segue to turn to you and maybe tell us what you're doing now and how PBL prepared you for what you're doing now and how you compare it to people who came through a more traditional learning environment. Would you do that?
So at the moment I'm on surgical rotation out in Clonmel, and very much the student gets to be a part of the team, and they really foster that. So what you do is you'll go about with the team and they'll shoot questions at you, they'll ask you to try and diagnose patients, they'll ask you to perform exams and to report back in a very real world way, but with the safety net of somebody always looking over the shoulder and somebody there to take care of you. I think PBL is probably a very good way to train for that scenario. And there's many reasons, as Deirdre would have covered. Central would be self-efficacy and independence. And also the ability at the same time to work in a group. So PBL, I think, is a really great way of teaching a person to teach themselves. I suppose that's essentially what it is. But you find that you can't be in a situation that you can't sort of learn your way back out of. You're very good at assessing yourself, assessing what you know, what you need to know, and then just, at the end of the day, getting it done. I mean, for the first 2 years, there's really no way you can escape not being able to just get things done when the pressure is on, and there's a lot of demands and the schedule is very tight, but you have to, it's twice a week you're there, and you're there to support your friends and to try and do your best.
I want to turn to Colin for thanks again. I want to turn to Colin in a moment, but maybe Colin, before we go there, Mike, you're currently working in a school that's more traditional. I think it's fair to say.
It certainly doesn't have the problem-based learning set up, but we have a case-based learning system, which I think is RCSI's nod to the need to do things a little bit differently. So I find it's more innovative than I thought it was. I do miss PBL. I think the big benefit is it teaches you to ask questions and to question the dogma. I remember very vividly my 4th year at med school, my first ever ward round in the hospital, being thrown off the ward round for daring to ask the consultant a question. No one told me you didn't do that. It took me a while to recover. If I'm rounding at UHL, and I was, and I hadn't had a question by the second bay from you guys, I'd be a little bit worried. So I think it gives you the confidence to recognise the gaps in your knowledge and not be afraid to ask a question, which my generation we had it knocked out of us, I'm afraid. And I think that's good for you and it's good for patients. And it's particularly good for us because on occasion when we introduced this in Nottingham, same system, consultants feel a little bit uncomfortable. I had a colleague who rang me and said, I've had a couple of your new graduate entrants on my ward round and they are asking me questions. And I explained, yes, that's the way it's going to be. You know, when they ask you a question, they're wanting some help, you know, where to find an answer. And he said, but I ask the questions normally. And I said, well, that's the way it's going to be. It's going to be better. And he said, but what happens if they ask you a question you don't know the answer to? You know, it's not surgical. It's something about physiology or something I've long since forgotten. And I said, well, pretty easy. You just say, Fionn, very interesting question. Perhaps you could look it up and inform us at the beginning of the ward round next week when we start. And I left it at that. I saw him at a meeting at the med school in Nottingham a few weeks later, and he rushed up to me and said, Mike, thanks for that tip you gave me. How are you getting on with those graduate entrants? He said, you know, it's amazing how much I've learned from those guys in the last couple of weeks. So you're good for us as well as for yourselves and for the patients. So.
Indeed. Colin, research has been there right from the beginning, I think. Can you speak to what the major research focus has been, where you see things going?
I think I'd probably reflect a little bit on the fact that the research in the medical school wasn't really there from the beginning, in the sense that it was 2010 when the focus changed from developing the first years of the curriculum to establishing a research program. I came back having met Paul and joined from a multinational business where I was Director of Innovation for a very large program. And I met some colleagues who said, what could you possibly hope to achieve in the short term in a medical school that was starting from nothing? And I took a moment to, I guess, stop and think about it. And I said, you're forgetting something, which is that medical research in UL did not begin with the medical school. There were people, Pierce Grace, Declan Lyons, Catherine Adley, Tony Pembroke, Dick Fitzgerald, and other people, Tim McLaughlin, in biomechanical engineering and so on, in microbiology, in physical education and sports science, who have been working in these areas for a number of years. So there was already a track record in that space. So I guess we were like somebody who's been asked to pedal a bike in a very high gear and to begin that way. And what people have forgotten is that there was a lot of people around us to put their hand on our back and give us a little bit of a push. So we got that early traction, and we started to move in a direction. And I think at the time, if somebody had asked me what would we achieve and what could we contribute, I would have said we'll contribute something, but I have no idea what it is at this stage. And over time, and if I look back now and say, okay, what have we done in 7 years? And I could talk about millions of euro of income which we've achieved, or I could talk about hundreds of publications or thousands of citations, which is a measure of the relevance of the work that we do. But that's fairly meaningless today. And I think instead what I would say is that there's a very big so what to what we do and what we have done. Because of our friends and colleagues in the hospital group, we've become recognized as a centre of excellence in dealing with hospital-acquired infections, and because of that, the European Commission is investing in new antimicrobial coatings so that staff and patients will be at reduced risk of those type of infections in Limerick. We've developed medical devices along with our colleagues in paediatrics and in respiratory medicine, both in Barrington's, or the Bon Secours now, and also in UHL. And because of that, paediatric cystic fibrosis patients in Limerick will be the first in the world to use our devices, which will help prevent infections that are really dangerous for them. Anne McFarlane was mentioned earlier on by Paul. We've developed a program along with John Salzburg, who has joined us from Canada, where patients for the first time in the region will actually not only be consulted, but will help drive and design the research. We've heard about Calvin Coffey and his team's innovations and discoveries around the mesentery and the anatomy of that, and because of that, patients in Limerick are going to undergo surgery that is designed in a particular way to enhance their outcomes. The school has accelerated, I think, in partnership with the HSE and the JP McManus Trust locally, the development of a robotic system here for surgery, which reduces blood loss, reduces patient time in theatre, and will have a significant impact for their outcomes. And I could go on. There's a litany of things that are there that have developed. And I guess at this point I would say that we also have another group of students. They're the postgraduate students, those who are doing PhDs and Masters and MDs, and they're the engines behind all of that, and they're the people who are driving their own careers by working with all of us as we try to move the programs forward. So to finish the analogy, we started to cycle, and we're probably pedaling fairly fast now, and we're building up a little bit of speed. We need to catch up with others, clearly. But I think this is a good time to look around and say thanks to all of those who put their hand on our back in those first days and gave us that push that we needed to get us going. We couldn't have done it without those.
Indeed, well said, Colin. So currently we have about, I think, 600 students, 60 postdocs, would that be right? Postgrads, so quite a number. To change direction, Finn, the humanities seems to be an important part of the program at UL, and you're an award winner as of this.
He's not going to disagree.
How does that help you be a better doctor, and was it a useful thing as you were going through, or a distraction?
I certainly think it was useful. And humanities, I guess there's two ways of looking at it in relation to GEMS. And first is, say, the background of people that we get coming into the course. And I think that's quite important. Obviously, you look at the traditional people coming in from biosciences, and you get crossovers from physiotherapy and the like. But a large proportion of the class is necessarily people who have a law background or a philosophy, music. One of the guys was in the Irish Army before he came. We have everybody. And what it does in learning, I think, is it gives a lot of different perspectives for looking at the same problem. And I definitely think that the humanities perspective helps to balance out the more traditional science side of things. In terms of what we do with the humanities in the course, I think it was absolutely a great way to spend time. As part of third year, we get to do an art project, and it's in a very loaded course. So, I mean, otherwise you wouldn't be taking the time that you do take to be creative and to broaden your mind. And I think the overall purpose of the art project is to get a student to consider sort of more broadly how the humanities can be applied to a patient and their well-being. And I absolutely think it was worthwhile.
Very good. Time, unfortunately, runs short, and we just have a couple of moments before the break. I wonder, Deirdre, Colin, Mike, if you have any thoughts you want to share with the audience about the next 10 years, about what you see. Mike, start with you.
I've no doubt we'll meet again at some point in the future at a gathering like this and celebrate further success. I think the roots were laid a long time ago. We heard about this from Paul and all of the others. I think they're beginning to bear great fruit. We see the research shoots really taking off in the last few years, but I think as our graduates go further in their careers, our Canadians are just about to enter their full professional life after completing training. And I think the word gets around very quickly about the quality of our graduates. And I think that's probably something that's going to put UL GEMS on the map more than anything. I think our best marketing, if we ever needed to market the school, is actually the quality of the graduates that emerge from it. And that's due to obviously the people that founded the school, but it's also due to the hard work I saw for 5 years in the second phase, people working very hard, very dedicated people in the GEMS, all pulling together because essentially we want to produce doctors who are better suited to the needs of patients than perhaps in previous generations, and loyalty as well. I hope very few people leave the GEMS. Why do we go to Australia or Kuala Lumpur? It's because we seek another new medical school with the same kind of spirit that we found in the GEMS. It's as simple as that. And people like Paul and I will travel for that rather than sticking around and getting in the hair of our successor. I think that's something Paul and I both took a decision on.
We will leave hair out of this. Colin?
I arrived here with a fine head of hair, I would say.
I guess we have to stay ambitious. I think it's probably bad news for somebody like Paul because we might ask you to come back and design a new building. We've reached our capacity in terms of our research labs, and people like Kieran McDermott and Pat Kiley who are building their teams, our microbiology-based teams and so on. We need more space, we need more resource, and I guess this is the opportunity to put our hand up and say that if it can be built, we can fill it. And I think there's lots of people and a lot of energy, and the enhanced partnership we have with the hospital group locally, I think that can only lead to good things.
Yes, indeed. Deirdre?
I suppose from the program's perspective, the BMBS program itself, I think what I would like to see is for us to continue to improve the student experience. I mean, PBL is fantastic. It does allow our students to hit the ground running when they graduate. And I think PBL clinical skills, all of that is actually producing a relatively enjoyable experience. But I think we can always, strive to improve. So being dynamic, continuing to improve, continuing to evaluate is going to be very important going forward. Overall, though, from the education piece, I think we do need to grow a little bit. And we have some ideas. We have a Master's in Health Professions Education, which we're hoping will be coming on stream in September this year. I can see one or two other programs that I think we have fantastic opportunities to collaborate with colleagues here in UL. I think it's important that we don't have too many programs. We will dilute ourselves too thin, but certainly opening ourselves up, and obviously opening ourselves not just to regionally and nationally, but also to the global market, I think is going to be important from an education perspective.
Great, thank you. It is 22 minutes past 4. Why don't we take a 10-minute break and start at 25 to 5 sharp, and then we'll have the second 20-minute panel, and we'll move towards the conclusion. Please join in thanking the panelists for their presentations. Thanks a million. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back.
Come back, thank you. Sorry.
We're running a little bit late, but not too bad, and I think we'll catch up. So I would like to introduce you to the second half of the program. We're going to have a 20-minute panel discussion, and I'll introduce you to the panelists in a moment. And then Dr. Fitzgerald has kindly agreed to share some observations with us. And then Pierce Grace will come up and present this beautiful piece of work to the university on the occasion of the school's birthday. And I've already had some interesting comments about this, Pierce, including from Charlotte. Where are you, Charlotte?
Hello.
There you are. Charlotte is the second-year student representative, and Charlotte has developed a rather unique interpretation of this piece of work, which she's going to share with us. And then I'm going to invite Rachel Msetfi to come and present some small tokens to the founding members of the school, and then we'll adjourn to the lobby for cake and refreshments. I hope that sounds agreeable. So let's start the second panel. audiovisual people have had a little trouble hearing, so we may need to pick up those microphones or at least lean in close to them. Michael, should we begin with you? Can you tell us who you are and why you're here?
Michael Butler.
You might want to pick that up, Michael.
Okay. My name is Michael Butler. I'm born in 1940, one of the oldest of 10 in family. I moved to Castleconan in the late 60s, but I had no hospital experience really until I moved with Dr. Culhane in Castleconan. I was in for my flu jab. I was outside the door going back out, and I said to him, I get the pain there in my chest and all the time when I'm walking. So my wife always called me a chicken, not mercenary. Yes, this is me. I was one of those. Yeah, so back in, I sat down, he done a letter, sent me into John's, St. John's, and I was taken out to the regional hospital. Made me go in today. I was taken to the regional hospital, and I had an angiogram done. And I had 73% of a blockage in one of my arteries.
Goodness.
Now, that was going on for 6 years before I did tell Dr. Culhane. That's what I was like.
Now, Michael, what's been your interaction with the medical school?
Yeah, but I started with Dr. Culhane. So I had the one stent. That was in 2007. 2008, my wife passed away of cancer. 2009, I was in that hospital again, pain here in the groin, had a kidney removed and a hernia done.
And where did the students come into all of this, Michael?
So after that, Dr. Culhane sent me in, I got involved with the students. But my wife is like to think that I do that, because she always called me chief. So I got involved in coming in. I was asked would I come in. I did it. I didn't think I could do it.
Coming in for what now?
Sorry?
You said you got involved coming in. That was
Yes,
with the early
Dr. Culhane
students.
asked me would I do it. Yes.
Okay. So what Michael's referring to is there's a program whereby right from day one, really, the medical students get to interact with somebody who has an illness. It's often a woman in pregnancy, but it could be a more chronic illness. And that's when you met them, I think,
Yes,
Michael, was it?
so, but it turned my life completely around because I couldn't sing, play music or dance. I never took a drink in my life, so I had very little social life until I came in and started talking to the students. I couldn't talk to them.
And they taught you how to sing and dance.
I taught them the whole story. Yeah.
Calvin Coffey is on your left. Calvin, can you tell us a bit? You don't need to tell us your medical history.
Okay. I was born in 1972. I'll start from there.
But the truth would help.
So, just because I'm a surgeon. So I saw the question that you were going to pose to me for the first time during the break, and it was, did the medical school influence me in coming back to Limerick? And to be honest, the primary determinant of me coming back to Limerick and to Ireland was my wife, who said, "We're going back." And do you know what?
You would be strong, decisive, and in control as a surgeon, right?
Yeah. Well, I like black and white, so Dee presented it in a black and white fashion to me. But I had heard that there was a new medical school had started, and I looked into it and saw that the program was very, very interesting and very different to the programs that previous medical schools had worked on. And this really piqued my interest because we were, as you know, back then, 2010, we were in the midst of a difficult time socially in Ireland. And I felt that unless we're going to do something differently and do something innovative, then we're really not going to be able to dig ourselves out of trouble as a society. And I felt that the medical school and the innovation and the spirit of the medical school and the spirit of the individuals who were spearheading it and leading it was remarkable. And that's something that I felt I wanted to be involved in. And so whilst I had everything in the States, I was in the Cleveland Clinic, I could operate as long as I wanted. and I could do as much research as I wanted. It was clear to me that there was something special going to happen here in this region. Paul Finucane, Pierce Grace, Declan Lyons basically had generated a blank canvas. We could set up or innovate in respect of medical treatment and advance based on that blank canvas, and that was very exciting.
Excellent. Thanks, Calvin. And Colette, great to see you here. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
So if Calvin was born in 72, I was born in 1980. And as Calvin knows, behind every great man is always a great woman. So we're glad to have him back in Ireland. I'm Colette Cowan, I'm the CEO of UL Hospitals Group, and my background is actually nursing. I trained in Dublin, and I'm 30 years now in the Irish Health Service, in the public service, and there's no day I don't enjoy coming to work because it's very different every day. I'm an innovator and a strategist, and I like action. And last July, on a very hot summer's evening, I sat in Paul Finucane's back garden with John O'Connor, and I have to say it was the best conversation I had of my career with a very bright, intelligent man, to see his strategy and the way he puts action behind things. And it was, for me, the call really for the region that if he could do it, anyone could do it. So I'm delighted to have had that opportunity. I just want to acknowledge that.
Excellent. Great to have you here. Bill?
Thanks, Des. I'm Bill Shannon. I'm a retired GP, and I was minding my own business in the medical school in Penang in Malaysia from the College of Surgeons, starting a new medical school, when I came home on holidays and had the misfortune to meet Paul Finucane. He invited me down to Union Hall, and his winning point, because Paul always has it all laid out, planned, he said, "You really should come back to this medical school. We need you there. And it's not going to be in Limerick, it's going to be in Clare."
Oh. But it didn't start off in Clare.
No. So he had me hooked from there on, because having been born in Kilkee, that was it. I said, "Okay, Paul, I'll do that."
Colette, maybe I could turn to you first. I mean, from my perspective, the medical school has had a huge impact on healthcare in the region. Do you share that, and could you speak to that point?
Sure, I'm 3 years in the region now, and I've looked at healthcare for many years, and we were really at the mercy outside of the region for a long, long time to get the input of students into the arena, and it depended on the sunny disposition of other schools across the country. But in the last number of years, we are actually now pivotal. So the graduate entry medical school here determines the health services. We've international best practice going on. I walk through the hospital on any day, and you have 2,000 staff roaming around. It's like Grand Central Station, and you see these students, who are there learning with us, and they've created that energy for us. So it's a big change, because we're no longer a hospital or the regional hospital. We're a campus of hospitals that's driving change and innovation. So we're delighted to see it there.
Indeed. But I think, Colette, one of the things that really strikes me about the medical school is that it's not just a hospital-based system. I mean, we do have hospital linkages all over, really, multiple hospitals. But there's a very strong emphasis on GP care, Bill. I wonder if you could speak to the GP network and tell people a little bit about it.
Sure, yes. Well, I go back nearly as far as Michael, and I graduated in Cork in the 60s, and I did 6 years of course in medical school, and not a day in general practice of the 6 years. So things could only go one way after that. And I was in practice for nearly 20 years in Cork before moving to the College of Surgeons, where I was teaching for a number of years. And so there we started with a week in general practice for students, but of course they were just observers, as so many medical schools still have their students going out to a practice for a couple of weeks as observers. But one of the really exciting things for me about the project that Paul presented to me was that there was going to be virtually a residency for students in general practice in the UL Medical School. And when he brought Paul Worley over from Australia to address a number of GPs I had invited for the first meeting to see if it would catch on here, because most GPs had been used to taking a student into their practice for a couple of weeks. I said to Paul Worley, just take it easy now, because you're going to ask GPs to take a student for 18 weeks? And he said, yeah, that's what we do in Australia. I said, well, don't think it'll work.
Were you right?
Absolutely wrong. Yeah. Delighted to be wrong. And Billy O'Connell and all the others here who became involved just proved me absolutely wrong. And it was great. And then the essential thing, the key thing about the experience of the students in UL in general practice, which first of all is the long duration, so they see continuity of care rather than just seeing patients for 1 week or two. But they have their own consulting room. So the practices and some GPs who don't have a spare room are unable then to get involved with the program. But so one of the key things is the student has his or her own consulting room and gets to see patients from the start, those who are agreeable to see the student first. And then the students try and work out with their background in problem-based learning what the actual clinical situation might be, then consult with their GP mentor on the premises and come to a fairly good working diagnosis.
Bill, what's the impact like of having a young student asking a lot of questions, a lot of energy, on a GP who's working on his or her own in a small village? And what's the effect on the village?
Well, the GPs I've spoken to have said it has enriched their practice and has put them on their toes like never before. Because the students are not short, of course, in asking questions, and of course the wise GP reflects the student question back to the student to go and find out in some cases. But I think it enriches the practice and stimulates the GP to enhance his or her own learning, and they get great value from that. You could ask, some of them are in the audience here, they say it has been a two-way street for them, that they've benefited from it as well as the student. And one of the key things about the attachment is the students get to see the range of normal. Now, that mightn't sound very exciting to a student who is looking for blood and gore and so on, but actually the range of normal is very important, as you know, as clinically. Then when does abnormal begin? So they don't get to see it often in hospitals, because most of the people in hospital, by the nature, have something wrong with them. But actually a number of people, like the young mum who comes with the baby, her first baby, is asking several questions about the baby's development and so on. And it's great to see the student developing the confidence to be reassuring at that young age.
And I think it's a real milestone that the University of Limerick has appointed the first rurally based chair of general practice in Ireland. I think that's correct.
Professor Glynn,
Yeah, Professor Glynn. Thanks, Bill. Calvin, if I could turn back to you, and maybe Colette could comment as well. You're a clinician and a researcher. Can you speak to what the environment is like at UHL?
Yeah, I think the environment it's perfect, really, for the students. It's not, well, I suppose if you go back to the mission statement of the school, and the mission statement of the school is that we would generate students, doctors, who are compassionate, who are confident, who are caring, and who are capable. And that's really, really a crucial statement. Now, you're not going to be able to generate a doctor who has all of those properties in the perfect environment. So, for example, if you're in the Mayo Clinic or the Cleveland Clinic, where you have CT scans at the drop of your hat, you have access to theatre everywhere, you have access to everything that you want at in a moment's notice. The environment in Limerick is very different. and it's a real environment, and it is incredibly busy. Professor Paul Burke always tells me that we've close on 400,000 patients, which I'm sure we are close to. That makes for an incredibly busy environment, and that brings with it stresses. And it's important that the students see all of those aspects of medicine in order that they can develop as doctors and develop as individuals in that kind of an environment. So it's a perfect environment, if you ask me, and the challenges that are there make it so.
Thanks, Calvin. Colette, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I think it's important around the domains of professional practice and what the Medical Council have laid down for all students to learn. So they really do see the cut and thrust of change every day in a hospital. It's like an incubator, really, of innovation and change. And what's really great for us now is that we have the Clinical Education and Research Centre right in the middle of the busy campus, and it's drawn all the people in from all services around academia, and it's really driving us and influencing people like me, a manager, the board managers, to actually make change on research and innovation. So we're very lucky, and I can see a very bright future around the collaboration and the partnerships we're going to have.
Thanks, Colette. Michael, you want to take that microphone for me? What are the properties you're looking for in a good doctor?
Well, it isn't what I done for the student at all, it's what the student does for me. Because I felt, when I was to come in and talk to a class of 20 to 30 people in the classroom, we was the earliest stages. Then I was in for the final exams, one-to-one. But when I talking to all these classes, then with the one-to-one, I found myself telling them what I hadn't already told my doctor. They made me go back and tell my doctor really what was wrong with me. So it made a great job of me. It isn't what I done for the students, as I say. It's what they done for me. But I enjoyed it. They'd ring me up, we'd come in for the exams. Then they'd ring me maybe and we'd come out to my house, some often meet in my house.
Really?
Students, yes. We meet in the Medical Centre in Castleconnell or in Ecotty. We might meet here somewhere I'd come in and meet him here somewhere in the campus here. And we'd go into and sit down around the table and have a cup of coffee. I had a great time.
Wonderful.
And it made such a difference in my life because my wife has gone in 2008.
Do I take it we can sign you up for next year?
Well, I missed the summer, the 2 days of the summer this year, for the exam at the summertime. I was away on a coach on a holiday, and I just missed out, and I thought I had my job lost.
Oh, well.
But it was Dr. Culhane really that got me roped into this. So I had taught more of the students some things before I taught Dr. Culhane. So it just changed my life completely. It did. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks, Michael.
So I'm so glad to be asked.
It's great to have you here. The time runs on. We could chat for a long time, I suspect, and I'd be happy to do it, but we're nearly up. I'm just going to run around and see if you have any final thoughts for how you would like to see things go, Calvin, or any other thoughts you'd share with us.
Yeah, I suppose probably the most important thing is the level of ambition that we have for our patients in the region. And the level of ambition that we have is now at the highest international standard. And I don't say that very lightly, and I'm being very practical when I say that. And we teach our students to that level. And in the future, we would hope that our students, and we know our students, will actually distribute that mission nationally and internationally. And I think for me, the most important thing is fostering that level of ambition and creating the environment in which that level of ambition can flourish.
Thank you. Colette?
I think at UL Hospitals we're about to launch our new strategy, our next 5-year strategy, and after careful discussion with the clinical directors and Professor Paul Burke, our Chief Clinical Director in the university, we've only 4 priorities. One of them is education, research and innovation, and we're ambitious about it. We see an academic health science centre as something that we will work very carefully on with the university. we want to be an incubator and an innovation hub as part of it. So we have the vision already to start working on that and collaborating and moving into the whole arena of a health campus. So I think the future is very bright in the Midwest.
Thank you, Skeletta. Bill, the future for GP?
Yeah, I think as general practice expands and the primary care team expands, because the GP has traditionally been often single-handed in Ireland. When I started, it was over 75% single-handed. Now it's much, much less, and it's predominantly partnerships and groups. But in terms of general practice and where we go from here, I would love to see general practice research in the area of education, of general practice education, that the research, and I'm sure Professor Glynn will pick that up from his background with the University of Galway. That'd be my wish and ambition for it.
Thanks, Bill. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you very much. Good. Thanks, Michael. Very good of you. Wonderful. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Des Fitzgerald, the President of the University of Limerick, who is going to share some thoughts with us. Dr. Fitzgerald.
Well, Des is much taller than me. It's the first thing I've learned. Second thing I learned this afternoon, that Des has another career as a talk show host. Maybe not in the vein of Graham Norton. I was thinking more of a Conan O'Brien. Yeah, I learned a lot today, I must say, about the story of GEMS. In a way, it doesn't surprise me, because what has struck me about the University of Limerick is that really it is forged on an ethos of innovation and entrepreneurship. And what we've seen today and in our surroundings, great examples of that. I'll get on to the GEMS in a minute, but there was also the Irish World Academy of Music and Dance, which is a unique school in Ireland. The university has also built this concert hall, which is, again, unique. It's one, I think, unique amongst our Irish universities. There's, just outside the door there, you'll see the School of Law, which, like GEMS, started in a small way and then grew into now a very large program. In fact, last year was awarded Best Law School of the Year. So that's quite an extraordinary achievement. And I think that's one of the things that I take from GEMS, and not just from today. I've often said that, and in a good way, that GEMS was a very brave step. The model, the PBL model of medical education, was the first time here in Ireland. And so one of the other unique features about the GEMS is that it started from scratch. I often look at other universities and their medical schools and wonder if they really understand where they came from and how the system worked. There's no doubt here that the GEMS school knows exactly where it came from and how, in that case, how it could be reshaped, and as several people have said today, and how it could grow further in the future. I think one of the unique things about GEMS is the relationship it has with the health service, with the hospital groups, and with the general practice. And as I was delighted to hear, and I knew about this because Colette and I have talked about it a few times, that ambition for the GEMS and more broadly health sciences to link with the hospital group in creating an academic health sciences centre. That is a hugely ambitious move, but a logical one, because the integration of the research, education and training that the university provides with the hospital will undoubtedly lead to better healthcare, better outcomes for our patients. And in fact, the system here is quite unique because the community health organisation that supports the delivery of healthcare to patients through general practice and other means is geographically the same as the hospital group. You don't see that anywhere else in Ireland. So again, that is a huge opportunity for GEMS, more widely for the university and for the hospitals. The other thing that I was glad to hear today was the ambition for research, which I think is key to the success of the university. I think GEMS has an extraordinary role to play in helping this university in the years to come, in particular through its contribution to research and the reputation that the university has for research. I think we're already seeing the impact of GEMS and the graduates that are coming from this institution. I just heard earlier today that this is the third year or fourth year running that our students have gone into, those students that have gone on to training in obstetrics and gynecology have won the gold medal in the MRCPI. And I think that was awarded to two of our students yesterday in Dublin. But I think that's just a start. I think many of our students are now being recognized as being outstanding medical graduates and will honor our university and honor our hospital system in the future through their success. When I think about the future, and I was glad to hear people talk about further growing the GEMS program, I think that we have a responsibility, and I say this as a clinician, we have a responsibility as doctors and nurses to recognize that we don't have all the solutions for managing and treating patients. I mean, I often say that, we very rarely cure patients, actually. We can help patients a lot. In every case, we can always provide patients with comfort, and I know that's one of the things that GEMS has focused on for the students. But in recognizing that there are many problems that we can't solve, we at the same time recognize that we have a responsibility in doing the research that's going to make difference to patients in the future. And that is one of the reasons, in fact, the primary reason, that we should be ambitious about developing our research programs in GEMS, but more widely in health sciences. So I want to congratulate, finally just congratulate the people who started the GEMS, Paul Finucane and John O'Connor, those who have continued it on, Mike and now Des, I think what you've done is quite extraordinary. I think you have provided not just the university, but the region with huge opportunities for students, and with, if I can use a pun, a jewel in the health system that will see our patients treated better, and we will see our health system in the Limerick region be recognized as an outstanding performer. Thank you very much.
We're here. And I'd like to ask Dr. Pierce Grace to step forward. Pierce, before you present this piece of work, this beautiful painting to the university, I wonder if you could speak to it a little bit and interpret it, because we've had several interpretations thus far.
Thank you, Des. this is my present to the university to mark the 10th anniversary of the school. And I'm absolutely delighted that we've got to the 10 years, and I have been involved from the very beginning, and it's really 20 years since lots of people in this room talked together and felt, why shouldn't Limerick have a medical school? And it's absolutely fantastic that we do. Now, this picture does not represent the current teaching methods in the school. What it is a representation of a faction fight. Faction fights were very common in early 19th century Ireland, and particularly in Cappoquite. There was a famous fair at Cappoquite, and regularly people were beaten up and sometimes killed in fights. So the painting represents one of these fights. The story goes that after somebody had been killed, the police arrested the perpetrator or the culprit, and he was brought before the assizes in Clonmel. And in court, the medical evidence was read out to say that the man who had been killed had a very thin skull, whereupon the accused jumped up in the court and said, "I put it to you, Your Honour, the fair at Cappoquite was no place for a man with a thin skull." So the painting captures, Des accuses me of all sorts of deep meanings behind this painting, but the painting captures the interest that I have. First of all, I teach the medical students about traumatic brain injury. So behind the figures is a picture of a skull, and then the figures represent my passionate interest in history, which anyone who knows me will know I bore them to death about. Paul Finucane stirred my interest in art, so this is my effort at, and Cappoquite is just out the road over the Tipperary border. So it's my great pleasure to present this, my effort to the medical school on its 10th year, and if I start work now, I might be able to get something for the 20-year session.
Thanks, Piers. The interpretations have varied. I interpret this as being a metaphor for university politics. That if you have a thin skull, you certainly shouldn't be involved. But our second year class representative, Charlotte, had a look at this in the interval. And Charlotte, I think you have a microphone. Do you want to come up here and tell people what you see in this? Clearly, Piers, you've created something that's going to be argued over for generations to come. Charlotte, what is going on here?
Well, at first I was like, it's awesome. But then I was looking at it and I actually thought, it looks a lot like PBL. And I was looking at this and I was like, you've got the tutor over here, kind of small, insignificant, kind of just, but he's there, you know, he's barking away, but nothing matters. Like all this turmoil.
Charlotte, are you sure we should go down this road?
I actually have just spotted my tutor here, so. And then they actually asked me which one I thought that I was in this, and I was like, well, obviously I'm this one. I'm posing the questions, I've got my stick, and I'm hitting everybody. But actually, now I look at it more, I think I'm this one over here doing a weird dance that's kind of oblivious to what everyone else is doing. But I think this sums up PBL quite well, to be honest.
Thank you, Charlotte. We found a place for it. It'll be just inside the door of GEMS, so I think it'll continue to provoke argument for a long time to come. It's now my pleasure to introduce the incoming Dean of the Education and Health Sciences faculty, Professor Rachel M. Setfi. And Rachel is taking over from Alison Perry, whom we'll miss. Alison has been a good friend to the school for many years. She couldn't be with us today, but certainly we're very grateful for all that she's done. Rachel, would you like to join me, please?
Yes, so as Des mentioned, I'm the incoming Dean of the Faculty of Education and Health Sciences. And I'm representing the faculty, so the medical school is one of the 6 schools or departments in the faculty, and the faculty was previously led by Professor Alison Perry, and before that, Professor Mary O'Sullivan. So I'm very lucky to take over a faculty and to lead it in a really, really good place. Now, before I get on with my task this afternoon, which is presenting some commemorative bowls, I just want to say a few words. So I took the brave step today of bringing my 10-year-old daughter Zara with me, who's grinning in the front, and she was instructed to be very quiet and very well behaved. The reason that I wanted to bring her with me today is because I wanted her to have the opportunity to share some of the inspiration that I've been feeling this afternoon, and also feeling in thinking about this 10th birthday of the medical school. So it all started with a small group of people who had a dream, and a dream that they made reality via hard work. And to me, that's really, really inspiring, that it takes a thought and an idea and a question, can we do it? And they did it. They went away and they made a medical school here in Limerick. So that's inspiring to me, and I want that to be inspiring to my daughter. And of course, it's not just the dreams and the visions and the starting off of the hard work that counts. What also counts is what happens next. So the current and previous staff of the medical school, including Mike and Colm and Deirdre and Des, who have all worked hard, and all the other colleagues who have all worked hard over the last 10 years to make this vision into reality. And of course, the other thing that I find incredibly inspiring are the students, and these amazing students that we've talked about this afternoon, 600 of them at the moment, and the postgraduate students who go out there every day and, along with our colleagues in the HSE, make a huge difference to everybody's lives in the region of Limerick. So I want to congratulate everybody on the 10th birthday of the medical school, and to stress that the medical school, as I see it, is not just something that sits on the campus of the University of Limerick. It makes a huge difference via its education and its research to the lives of patients and families here in Limerick, and of course internationally. So without further ado, I hope my daughter is inspired. She might be slightly bored, but I hope she remembers this at some point in the future. I would like to invite Professor Paul Finucane to receive his commemorative bowl, President Emeritus John O'Connor, Mairead Waters and John Maroney also onto the stage to receive their commemorative bowls. So,
I'll give them to you, Rachel. Well done. I'll give them to you.
They're very nice bowls, I should say, if there's any reluctance.
Well, thank you very much. This is beyond what I expected. Far beyond what I expected.
Councillor Hall, John, that was your creation too, like everything else.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In conclusion, I would like to thank you all very, very much for coming. It's been a wonderful event, a wonderful afternoon, and it shows you just what we can achieve when a group with a vision get together and drive a project forward. I hope you'll continue to be friends of the University of Limerick and of the medical school in years to come, and we look forward to meeting with you again. For now, let me conclude and invite you to come and witness the memorable picture, I suspect, of Paul Finucane cutting a birthday cake in the lobby. Thank you very much. Take care.